As the sun set over the quiet town of Willow Creek, the streets became deserted, and the only sound was the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. I was on my way home from work, lost in thought, when I noticed a figure in the distance. At first I couldn't make out what it was, but as it got closer, I saw that it was a person with a rabbit's head. I froze, unsure of what to do. The rabbit-headed figure was staring at me, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. Suddenly I heard a voice in my head. "Don't be afraid. I mean you no harm." I gasped in shock. The rabbit-headed figure could read my thoughts. You're talking to me through my mind," I stuttered, my heart racing. "Yes," the voice replied. "I need your help. There's something wrong with me. I can't control my thoughts and emotions. I've been killing people and I don't want to do it anymore. But I can't stop." I was terrified, but I felt a strange sense of empathy towards the rabbit-headed figure. It seemed genuinely remorseful for its actions. "What can I do to help?" I asked, my mind racing. "I need you to find the person who did this to me. They're the only one who can fix me," the voice replied. I agreed to help the rabbit-headed figure, and we set off on a quest to find the person responsible for its condition. It led us to a laboratory on the outskirts of town, where we discovered a mad scientist who had been experimenting on animals, trying to create the perfect killing machine. The rabbit-headed figure confronted the scientist, demanding that he reverse the process and restore its mind and emotions. But the scientist refused, laughing maniacally and saying that he had created the ultimate weapon and would never let it go. In a fit of rage, the rabbit-headed figure attacked the scientist, but he was no match for the scientist's powerful defenses. I watched in horror as the rabbit-headed figure was subdued and taken away by the scientist's guards. I knew that I had to act fast if I wanted to save the rabbit-headed figure. I teamed up with a group of like-minded individuals who were also victims of the mad scientist experiment. Together, we raided the laboratory, taking down the guards and fighting our way to the scientist's secret laboratory. There, we found the rabbit-headed figure trapped in a glass chamber, its mind and emotions completely controlled by the scientist's machine. I destroyed the machines and set the rabbit-headed figure free. It was grateful for my help, and it thanked me before disappearing into the night. I never saw it again, but I knew that it was out there somewhere, living its life free from the scientist's control. But the memory of the rabbit-headed killer stayed with me, a constant reminder of the dangers that lurked in the shadows waiting to strike. I knew that I could never let my guard down, that I always had to be ready to face any danger that came my way. The rabbit-headed killer had taught me that there was evil in the world, but there was also good, and it was up to us to fight for what was right and protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Despite the resolution of the rabbit-headed killer's story, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in my stomach. The memory of its haunting voice in my mind and the cold stare of its rabbit head were enough to keep me on edge for weeks. I started to see things out of the corner of my eye, shadows that seemed to move on their own, and whispers that I couldn't quite make out. It felt as if something was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. One night, I woke up to the sound of scratching at my bedroom door. I sat up in bed, heart racing, and listened intently. The scratching continued, growing louder and more frantic. I summoned all my courage and slowly made my way towards the door. As I reached for the doorknob, the scratching stopped abruptly, replaced by a deafening silence. I opened the door slowly, peering out into the hallway. There was nothing there, just an empty corridor bathed in moonlight. But as I turned to go back to bed, I felt a chill run down my spine. There, in the corner of my eye, was a shadowy figure with a rabbit's head. I screamed and stumbled backward, falling to the floor. The rabbit-headed figure didn't move, just stared at me with its unblinking, lifeless eyes. As I lay on the floor, gasping for breath, I realized that the rabbit-headed killer wasn't gone. It had found a way back into my life, and it was more determined than ever to destroy me. I spent the next few days in a state of constant fear, jumping at every creak and groan in my old house. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that the rabbit-headed killer was still watching me, still waiting for the perfect moment to strike. One night, I woke up to the sound of something tapping on my bedroom window. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, and peered out into the darkness. There, on the other side of the glass, was the rabbit-headed killer. Its eyes were fixed on mine, and I felt a wave of dread wash over me. I knew that I had to face it, to confront my fears head. On, I slowly made my way towards the window, my breaths coming in short gasps. As I opened the window, the rabbit-headed killer leapt through, landing on my bedroom floor with a thud. It stood there, its rabbit head turned towards me, waiting for me to make a move. I knew that I had only one chance to defeat the rabbit-headed killer. I had to face it head on, to use my strength and courage to overcome its mind. Reading abilities, with a deep breath, I charged at the rabbit. I charged at the rabbit. I charged at the rabbit-headed killer, my fists clenched. It leapt at me, but I managed to dodge its attack and land a punch on its rabbit head. It staggered backward, its mind-reading powers momentarily disrupted. I took advantage of the rabbit-headed killer's momentary weakness, launching a flurry of punches and kicks. It fought back, but I refused to back down, using all my strength and willpower to keep it at bay. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the rabbit-headed killer collapsed to the ground. Defeated, I stood over it, panting and sweating, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. As I looked at the rabbit-headed killer lying on the ground, I realized that it was just a victim, like me. It had been manipulated and controlled by the mad scientist, turned into a killing machine against its will. And I knew that I couldn't let that happen to anyone else. I made a promise to myself that I would do everything in my power to stop the mad scientist from creating any more monsters like the rabbit-headed killer. I knew that it wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to try. Over the next few weeks, I did some research, trying to find any clues that could lead me to the mad scientist. I scoured the internet, talked to anyone who might have any information, and even went to some of the seedier parts of town to ask around. Finally, after weeks of searching, I got a lead. A man who went by the name of Dr. Z was rumored to be the mad scientist behind the rabbit-headed killer He was said to live in a secluded mansion on the outskirts of town, surrounded by high walls and security cameras. I knew that I had to investigate further, to see if Dr. Z was really the man behind the rabbit-headed killer. I waited until nightfall, then made my way to the mansion. The walls were indeed high, and the security cameras were everywhere, but I managed to find a weak spot in the fence and slipped inside. I made my way towards the mansion, keeping to the shadows. As I got closer, I heard strange noises coming from within the mansion. It sounded like the cries of animals, mixed with the hum of machinery. I approached the front door and tried the handle. It was unlocked. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, my heart racing. The mansion was dark, but I could see flickering lights coming from a room at the end of the hall. I crept towards the room, trying to stay silent. As I reached the room, I peeked inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. There, in the center of the room, was a table with a strange device on top. And standing over the table was Dr. Z, a man with a mad gleam in his eyes. He was surrounded by cages filled with rabbits, all of them with strange devices attached to their heads. Dr. Z was manipulating their thoughts and emotions, just as he had done with the rabbit-headed killer. I realized then that Dr. Z was even more dangerous than I had imagined. He had turned the innocent creatures into his own personal experiments, and he was enjoying every minute of it. I knew that I had to stop him, to put an end to his twisted experiments once and for all. I charged at him, determined to take him down. But Dr. Z was ready for me. He pressed a button on the device on the table, and suddenly the rabbits in the cages began to stir. They leapt out of their cages, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. I tried to fight them off, but there were too many of them. They swarmed around me, biting and scratching, their rabbit heads leering at me. Finally, I collapsed to the ground, my strength failing me. I thought that it was the end, that the rabbits would tear me apart. But then, something strange happened. The rabbit-headed killer, the one that I had defeated, appeared out of nowhere. It stood between me and the attacking rabbits, using its strength to fend them off. I realized then that the rabbit-headed killer had a heart, that it wasn't just a mindless killing machine. It had saved my life, and I knew that I had to repay the favor. Together, the rabbit-headed killer and I fought off the attacking rabbits. We managed to destroy the device on the table, putting an end to Dr. Z's twisted experiments once and for all. As we stood there, surrounded by the destruction we had wrought, I looked at the rabbit-headed killer with a newfound respect. It had been my enemy, but it had also been my ally when I needed it the most. And so, the rabbit-headed killer and I parted ways, each going our separate paths. I never saw it again, but I knew that I would never forget the strange creature that had saved my life. In the days and weeks that followed, the news of Dr. Z's twisted experiments began to spread. People were horrified by what they had learned and demanded justice for the innocent creatures that had been turned into monsters. Eventually, Dr. Z was apprehended and brought to trial. He was found guilty of animal cruelty, among other charges, and was sentenced to life in prison. As for me, I was hailed as a hero for my role in stopping Dr. Z's experiment. I received numerous awards and accolades, but I knew that I owed it all to the rabbit-headed killer, the creature that had helped me when I needed it the most. In the years that followed, I continued to investigate strange occurrences and creatures that threatened the safety of the people in my town. But I always remembered the lessons I had learned from the rabbit-headed killer. I learned that sometimes even the most unlikely ally can become a friend in times of need. And I learned that sometimes the true monsters aren't the ones with the strange appearances, but the ones who lurk in the shadows, manipulating innocent creatures for their own twisted purposes. As I look back on my encounter with the rabbit-headed killer, I can't help but feel a sense of awe and wonder. It was a creature unlike any other, with powers that defied explanation. But it was also a creature with a heart, one that had saved my life and helped me to see the world in a different way. And so I will always be grateful to the rabbit-headed killer for showing me that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope for a brighter tomorrow. If you like my story, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like the video for more and similar stories.